The millionaire's cruel wife publicly humiliates the maid. What she did next shocked everyone. The exquisite chandelier shimmered above, casting a warm, golden glow on the guests as they mingled throughout the opulent ballroom. Harvey's home had the air of a dream come true, with its high ceilings, marble floors, and massive windows offering a breathtaking view of the immaculate gardens. This evening was no exception. The celebration began to get into full swing with glass-breaking laughter and the soft murmur of classical music. Lauren, Harvey's wife, was positioned in the middle of the room, commanding the attention of her affluent peers. From the outside, she looked elegant, her petite figure emphasized by her sleek silver gown. Her sharp eyes scanned the room, taking in every exchange and visitor. She relished her status as the epitome of supremacy, untouchable. Her smile, nevertheless, was only a shindy. Under that polished exterior was a frigid heart, treating everyone around her more like pieces to be played than like equals. Lauren valued power above all else, and she got it via her marriage to Harvey, one of the wealthiest men in the neighborhood. His wealth had put her on this pedestal, and she had no intention of taking it off. Emily, the new maid, cautiously made her way around the room. Even though she had just recently started working for the family, she was hardly acknowledged by Lauren and her friends. She poured beverages for the guests without looking up, disguising herself as a shadow in her simple black outfit as she gathered empty cups. Emily's work saved her life. She had debts to pay, and her family back home relied on the money she sent. She didn't mind the laborious labor or the glitz and glitter surrounding her. But this evening, something was different. There was a palpable sense of unease in the air. Maybe it was the way Lauren followed her around like she was just waiting for Emily to make a mistake. Then it happened. Emily moved through the crowd carrying a tray of beverages, feeling her foot catch on the thick carpet. The glasses flew through the air and struck Lauren's exquisite gown in front of the tray as it tipped forward. Time appeared to have halted. People nearly gasped as the dark liquid spread like a bloodstain across the gleaming fabric. For a while, there was silence. Emily remained still, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew what was going to happen. Lauren's angry expression twisted as she cast a glance down at her ruined clothing. "You idiot." Lauren let out a loud hiss that was audible to everyone in the room. "Do you know how much this garment costs? Or are you just too simple-minded to understand anything so fundamental?" Emily flushed her face and looked uncomfortable. Lauren apologized with her mouth hanging wide, but she wasn't finished. "For this reason alone, people just like you will never amount to anything in life. You are a worthless maid, and you always will be. You can't even carry a tray without smashing everything." The guests who were encircling them moved tensely, uncertain about how to react. Some avoided eye contact awkwardly, but most just pretended to look away and focus on their drinks. No one dared to intervene. No one wanted to provoke the evening's queen, Lauren, into a rage. But Emily felt a feeling of peace wash over her as she stood there, clutching the tray's crumbs firmly in her hands. She was not going to cry, ever. She was not going to ask to be forgiven. Instead, for the first time that night, she raised her head and focused solely on Lauren. "You forget that I am aware of your actual story," Mrs. Lauren said quietly but firmly. The room collapsed in silence. Lauren's eyes furrowed for a moment, as if she were having trouble absorbing what Emily had just said. "Then what in the world are you talking about?" she exclaimed, her icy, bitter laugh echoing through the room. Lauren's eyes flashed doubt, but she snapped, and Emily didn't back down at all. "I know what your history is. I know what you've done. And if you can't remember, I'd be pleased to remind you." As they listened, the guests' curiosity became apparent. The audience was muttering to itself as Lauren and Emily's eyes were shooting back and forth like wildfire. For the first time that night, Lauren had no right to be in that room. Harvey was at the door conversing with some of the visitors when he noticed the disruption and began to move over his brow. He looked at the wine-stained shirt and his wife's nervous expression, raising his eyebrow in confusion. What on earth was happening? Harvey approached Lauren and Emily and asked in a cool, collected but firm tone. Lauren turned to look at him, her anger barely contained. This maid was so cocky as to try to make me appear bad in front of everyone that she left a bad taste in her mouth and spit out the phrase. Harvey glanced at Emily with curiosity. In what manner did you speak to her? Emily gave him a steady look. All I wanted to do was tell Mrs. Lauren that things aren't always what they seem to be. Harvey frowned and turned to look at his pale wife. The tension in the room was evident, and her composure was starting to falter. This evening, standing straight and collected, Emily knew that. It felt like everything was going to change in the room. Everyone was holding their breath, wondering what would happen next. With fury in her eyes, Lauren gripped the edge of a nearby table tightly. Being questioned was not something she was used to, especially not by a maid like Emily, whom she considered to be inconsequential. But Emily's calm confidence in her eyes unnerved her. Harvey stood between the two women now, his gaze shifting from Emily's calm demeanor to his wife's trembling hands. He had a feeling that something important was happening here, something more than just a drink spill. Although Lauren has a tendency to lose her temper, this seemed different. Lauren forced a smile, but it remained out of her view. What precisely are you saying, Emily? The laughing had stopped earlier, but a sharp edge had grown in its stead, and there was still a disdain in her voice. Emily maintained her poise and expression without faltering. I'm not assuming anything. Her words were quiet. Mrs. Lauren, I'm stating a fact. I know the real story you have been attempting to hide for so long. The guests tried to be informal, but they were listening carefully to everything that was said. The servers had even dropped what they were doing to cast a sidelong peek at the scene unfolding. The deep tension almost made it feel like suffocation. Lauren reddened, and for a split second it looked like she was about to hit Emily in front of everyone. But she held back, knowing that another tantrum would only exacerbate the situation. Instead, she turned to face Harvey, her voice overflowing with fake sympathy. As though to stabilize herself, she placed a hand on his arm and said, Harvey, darling, this girl is delusional. She's trying to ruin my image in front of our guests. You can't let her ruin the evening by standing by, can you? Do you concur? Harvey remained silent, narrowing his eyes. He watched the situation unfold and glanced curiously at Emily. To which story is she alluding? Although it seemed calm, there was a tinge of suspicion in his query. When Emily's eyes met his, it seemed as though time had stopped for a moment. She knew that once she said those words, there would be no going back. Either people would accept her story, or it would get increasingly difficult for her to live here. However, the truth had to come to light. She owed it to the individuals Lauren's crimes had forced her to suffer in quiet, and to herself. Mrs. Lauren Harvey has not been honest with you. At first, Emily spoke slowly and avoided discussing her past or her engagement in specific activities. I'm talking about the cash, the lying, and the things she's done behind your back. There was a surge of incredulity among the visitors, and their whispers grew louder. Lauren became enraged with Emily, her face turning scarlet and her voice quivering with barely contained rage. Would you dare? You are only a maid, nothing more. You are unaware of all the specifics of my existence. Emily, nevertheless, remained composed and didn't give in or become more assertive. You may think so, Mrs. Lauren, but you're not right, she responded. I can prove that my knowledge exceeds yours. Lauren's eyes opened for a moment, then closed again, clearly showing a racing mind. What? Proof? Which falsehoods are you trying to spread? Before Emily had an opportunity to respond, Harvey took a step forward, his words cutting through the tension like a blade. He whispered, enough, but his voice was such that it made everyone take a moment to catch their breath. He turned to face Emily, his eyes serious. Declare your position, and then offer the supporting documentation. Emily took a big breath. Her gaze never strayed from his as she said, I wasn't always a maid. My father used to work for your company. Harvey he held the position of head accountant for over 20 years. He was a good-hearted, loyal, and committed individual. But he found something he wasn't supposed to. And when he tried to tell the truth, things got challenging for him. The room fell silent, everyone feeling the impact of her words. Lauren shifted uneasily but said nothing. This time, Harvey's brow furrowed in confusion. How would you respond? Emily? In other words, my father found discrepancies in the financial records, discrepancies that suggested significant sums of money were being diverted into private accounts. Emily continued speaking, describing Lauren without hesitation. Lauren eventually lost her cool as gasps echoed around the room. This is not sensible. Her voice was high and aggressive. You can't think she may be sincere? Harvey. She's just making stuff up. Harvey, though, took a while to respond. He was staring at Emily, his mind racing. Even though he'd always trusted Lauren, there was something off lately. There had been whispers and rumors about questionable goings-on. He dismissed them as baseless gossip disseminated by envious individuals. But Emily turned to face him right away, her eyes brimming with honesty. My father meticulously recorded every detail. He found Mr. Harvey after he died. I found his documents. I know the truth, and I'm prepared to tell it to you. The location appeared to be frozen in time. Not a single person had the courage to breathe or move too loudly. Now, all eyes were on Harvey, waiting to see how he would react. Lauren's eyes, concealed by a look of fear, flickered between Emily and her husband. Harvey asked gently, "Where are these files?" When he finally spoke, Emily didn't hesitate to speak. "I can bring them to you tomorrow. All transactions and details are included." Lauren moved forward and pleaded aloud. Presently, "Harvey, you won't believe her. This is absurd since it seems like she's attempting to lie." Harvey, nevertheless, raised a hand to sufficiently silence her. "Lauren." His tone was sharp. Finally, he turned back to face Emily. "I want to view the files first thing tomorrow." Emily nodded, her pulse pounding. She had expected resistance, maybe even disbelief, but Harvey's answer gave her hope. She knew it wasn't quite done, but at least the first step was done. The tension slowly subsided, and the attendees began whispering again, but the party had taken on an entirely new vibe. Lauren stood there staring at Harvey, her chest heaving with shallow breaths. She had always been in control up until this point, but suddenly, her carefully constructed world was starting to come apart. The morning after, Harvey sat in his study, his fingers tapping the black wood of his desk. The rustle of papers as he carelessly shuffled them around was the only sound in the room. Ideas flew through his head. His doubts about Emily's claims had not gone away, and now, while he waited for her to return with the supposed evidence, his mind kept going over their entire conversation. All the little changes he'd noticed in Lauren over the past few months. Is it accurate to say that? Had Lauren, the lady he'd trusted and lived with for a lifetime, been lying to him the whole time? A knock on the door broke Harvey's train of thought, and he straightened in his chair. "Come in!" he yelled in a forceful voice. Despite the tension he was carrying within of him, Emily entered with a large, battered folder. She maintained her customary air of reserve, but her self-awareness had a new intensity. Her determined demeanor showed neither fear nor hesitation as she met Harvey's stare. Putting the folder down on his desk, she added, "I brought the files. This file has all the transactions, the discrepancies my father found, and the proof that they are all connected to Lauren." Harvey stared at the folder for a long moment, his heart pounding. Though he knew he had to investigate it, he was afraid to open it and face the truth. Taking a big breath, he opened the folder and started looking over the contents. His eyes swept over the correspondence, bank statements, documents, and notes made in the margins of accounting reports. Slowly, the parts began to fit together. It was evident that substantial quantities of money were being siphoned off into accounts with false names. The evidence could not be refuted. Harvey felt a wave of astonishment go over him. His hands started to shake as he grasped the paperwork, as the reality of what he was seeing set in with each page he turned. This wasn't a mistake. This was organized. It was Lauren who was planning this calculated action. How did he mumble his voice? His words were hardly audible as he looked up at Emily, who was standing perfectly still across the desk, her face displaying a mixture of resolve and sadness. How long will this situation last? My father learned about it nearly 3 years ago. He tried to call your attention to it, Emily shot back. Boutwell. Lauren found out after his death that she had made sure he remained silent. I located his files, stowed them away. I wasn't sure what to do at first, but I thought you should know the truth. Harvey closed his eyes for a moment and felt the weight of betrayal fall heavily on him. The lady he'd spent his entire life with had been lying to him, playing tricks on him, and covering her tracks for 3 years. It wasn't just about the money. It was related to the faith she had abandoned. Emily spoke once more, firmly yet quietly. I'm sorry, Mr. Harvey. I didn't plan to cause trouble, but I had to make sure she didn't get away with it. Not after everything that has happened to her. Harvey's eyes snapped open. All at once, he was overcome with a wave of emotions he could barely manage, including confusion and anger. He looked back at the documents. Each line of numbers was another jab in his chest. I was afraid. Harvey gave in a quiet voice. I had heard whispers and stories, but I never thought he would stammer and cut the sentence short. She has been cautious, said Emily. She's talented at the game, but she underestimated me and you too. Harvey regarded Emily as more than just a normal maid, rather. He saw someone who had the guts to tell the truth, even if it meant losing everything. She had a strength of character that he had never seen in her, a quiet fortitude that cried out to be honored. How can I show my appreciation? Said Harvey. He spoke in a very passionate tone. I will never be able to repay you for everything you have done for me. Emily shook her head. I'm not owed anything by you. Mr. Harvey, I just wanted to make sure you were aware of the reality. They did not say anything for a long while. Harvey's mind was racing with the consequences of what he had just discovered. Even though he knew what had to be done, the thought of going up to Lauren and blowing their relationship apart was frightening. What should I do now? Harvey asked himself, almost to himself. Emily paused to consider her response. You have to turn to face her. You need to be careful, but you also need to be answered. Lauren, she will not easily give up. Harvey nodded carefully, taking in what she had said. He knew that Emily was right. Lauren was sly and would lash out if she thought she was being cornered. He had to be prepared. I will see to it, said Harvey. Though at last his voice is more stable, I still have to think about how messy things could get. Emily remained mute, knowing that her part in this was soon over. She'd said the truth. It was now up to Harvey to determine what to do with it. In her words, I'm here if you need anything else. Harvey gave her a grateful nod. Emily, I truly do mean it. She left the room, gently shutting the door behind her. Harvey sat quietly for a few moments, staring down at the damning document that was in front of him. Nothing would be the same after his universe's turmoil. He knew that once he faced Lauren, there would be no turning back. Their shared existence will cease. But this is the first instance in a very long time. Harvey's vision became clearer as the mist in his head lifted. The doubts that had been plaguing him were finally starting to go away. Now Lauren would have to cope with the consequences of her heinous betrayal. Later in the day, in her own sitting room, Lauren was reclining on a velvet sofa while she leafed through a fashion magazine, looking like the picture-perfect lady. She had a champagne glass in her hand. She had a golden complexion with the soft glow of the afternoon sun streaming through the large windows and her silk robe falling gracefully over her slender frame. But her attention was not on the glossy pages before her. She was still reeling from what had happened the night before. Emily's remarks had bothered her ever since they were spoken. I know your actual story. Those 5 words had pierced the surface of control. How could Emily possibly know anything, given how tightly Lauren had always surrounded her? Was it not possible? Was it not? Steps behind her interrupted her thoughts. Approaching. Harvey's expression hardened as he entered the room. Lauren looked nervous, straightened up a bit, and set down the magazine. She had a feeling that something was off. "What is that?" she asked, a little irritated. Harvey stood for a long time at the edge of the room, as if he didn't know where to begin, the truth that he'd learned that morning still weighing heavily on him. That being said, the time has come. He could not ignore it any longer. With a calm yet firm tone, he said, drawing Lauren's eyebrows up, "We need to talk." She frowned, sat up straighter, and cautiously peered at him before she asked, "Talk about what?" Harvey moved further into the room, his gaze locked on her. He placed the folder on a nearby table, and Lauren was drawn to it immediately. "Emily stopped by to see me this morning." He began speaking slowly, despite the tumult growing within him. "She brought several papers for me. I think you ought to give additional information." Emily smirked at Lauren, instantly covering her little paleness. She growled, "You're believing that girl more than me. How could she have possibly stopped?" Harvey interrupted him so sharply that Lauren fell silent. He took a big breath and said again, "I've seen the evidence." "Lauren, I have seen it all." A cold silence fell between them. Lauren turned to face him, her countenance a mixture of confusion and growing terror. With her voice now lower, what proof did she demand? Harvey gritted his teeth, picked up the folder, and spread the papers out so they were on the table in front of her. Low bank statements, financial reports, transactions, and his voice were all reported. "That's something you never told me." Lauren's heart was racing as she studied the documents. She didn't need to read them to know what they were. Her carefully constructed world of untruth was being exposed to her piece by piece, and the walls were closing in. "For what duration has this been going on?" Harvey asked, a controlled wrath filling his voice. "For what length of time have you been lying to me?" Lauren, tense in every manner, got to her feet and tried not to lose her cool. With a wavering voice, she went on, "I don't know what you're talking about." "This is not sensible. You know me, Harvey. You know who I am. I would never do that. You seemed to be someone I knew." Harvey spoke up a bit and started talking, but at this point, that's all I knew. He took a step closer, searching for remorse in her gaze. Any indication that she would admit it? But all he could see was the same cold, disconnected look that had been on her face for years. "You became disloyal to me. Lauren, for what reason did you take money from me that you didn't need?" Lauren's face was warped by a defiant mask. "You don't understand," she screamed. "I made the required decisions in order to protect us and our future. Keep us secure." "You put everything at risk, Lauren. Everything we built together," Harvey remarked, staring at me with skepticism. "I was claiming our territory." Lauren seemed afraid. "If I hadn't stepped in, do you really think those board members' vultures actually would have left us with anything?" "Harvey, without my leadership, we would have lost everything." With an expression of wonder on his face, Harvey shook his head and remarked, "Control is what this is all about. You sought more power and believed that stealing was appropriate to control things behind my back." Lauren balled her fists in frustration, but you were too weak to notice it. "Harvey, you allowed them to treat you badly. Since you refused to defend our rights, I had to act alone." Harvey glanced at her, a dreadful melancholy settling in his breast. "Back then, it was never about us. This was about you and your need to be in charge." Lauren said nothing. She knew she had no power over this situation anymore, but she wasn't ready to give up just yet. Harvey's voice softened, but the pain in his eyes did not go away. "I loved you very much. Lauren, all of my confidence was betrayed by you for your personal benefit. For a little while only." Lauren stumbled. Her attempt to speak was unsuccessful. She would have said anything to save what was left. She could feel her carefully constructed character crumbling from under her fingers. "I can't remember who you are," Harvey said in a low voice. His voice was bitter and mournful at the same time. "But there is one thing I know for sure. You don't deserve my faith. You don't deserve any of this." Lauren finally realized it, and her heart raced in her chest. She was going to lose everything that she had battled for. Everything under her control was falling apart in front of her eyes. "Harvey." "Please," she whispered, taking a step toward him. "I'm able to fix this. I'll correct the situation." Harvey stepped backward, shaking his head. "It's too late for that." The finality of his words hung in the air for the first time, Lauren. Lauren felt real fear. This was more than just a disagreement. Was more than just a minor detour. This signified the end. Harvey turned away, his heart pounding from the betrayal, and said, "We're done here," approaching the door from the side. The door closed behind him. Lauren remained still, her mind reeling from the enormity of what had just happened. She labored to control this universe, but she could not prevent its collapse. Harvey ran down the hallway, emotions whirling in his head. He was struggling with the reality that Lauren's lies and manipulations were causing everything he had built his life around to crumble. When he reached his office, he slammed the door behind him and slumped against the desk, trying to make sense of it all. Despite Lauren's years of deceit, he had always taken immense pride in his ability to read people and recognize dishonesty. He had loved her and trusted her with everything, and now he was standing amid the ruins of a marriage he had thought was real. Still, something else bothered him, something that didn't feel quite right. Emily's involvement. She had told the truth, and Harvey was grateful, but the question remained. Why had she waited for what appeared to be a sign this time? He was startled out of his daydream by somebody knocking on his door. Emily entered the room with a calm yet serious demeanor, as if she had been waiting for this chance. "You said you wanted to come see me." She paused just inside the door and said, "Mr. Harvey." Harvey did not lose any time at all. His voice steady yet sharp, he gestured to the chair in front of his desk. "Have a seat." "Emily, we have to talk." Emily did as he asked, folding her hands in her lap. She gave him the feeling that she knew precisely what he was about to ask with her unwavering and direct glance. Harvey took a big breath, paced a bit, then turned to look at her. "You've been useful, Emily. Thank you for being honest with me about Lauren, but I need to know why. Why is this instance? Why did you take so long to offer this to me?" Emily didn't even blink an eyebrow at the question. "Since Mr. Harvey, I needed to make sure I had everything ready before coming to you." She seemed to have expected that. "Knowing the risks, I didn't want to provide you misleading information. But you've known for several months. Have you not?" Harvey's voice strained, a little harsher than he meant to. "In spite of having all this time, you waited for a purpose." Emily's gaze softened, but she remained composed. "The decision was not made hastily. I understood the consequences for her, you and me. I was unsure about your possible reaction. I wasn't sure if you would believe what I told you." Harvey leaned on the desk, crossing his arms. "You assumed that I would support her." Emily nodded, slightly. "I gave it some thinking. You and Lauren have been together for a long time. I didn't want to destroy your marriage." With a frown, he continued to tense his shoulder as though you were unprepared to confront reality. "But what would happen if I hadn't trusted you? If I had turned against you, I could have lost everything for you. I knew there were risks." Emily gave a hesitant yes, but I had to do what was right. Because he tried the right thing, my father lost everything. I could not let his work rest in the same grave as him. Harvey scowled at himself. "Yes, the bookkeeper was your father. He gave you his all." Emily gave a nod. "Harvey, mister, he worked for your family for over 20 years. When he realized what Lauren was doing, he tried to approach her, but she made sure his voice was never heard." Harvey felt a knot tighten in his chest. "What do you mean by this?" Emily's voice softened, and memories cast a shadow over her eyes. "My father approached Lauren in private. If she didn't tell, he vowed to take it to you. That all changed the next day, though. Lauren was able to disparage him such that it appeared that he was the one stealing. She threatened to ruin him and thus our family. His temper snapped. Though he remained silent, it consumed him. Harvey clenched his teeth at him. He didn't know any of this. For how long had he been missing this? And after his death, Emily continued, her voice full of quiet determination. I found his documents. He had kept track of every transaction and paperwork. He was going to come to you, Mr. Harvey. However, Lauren silenced him before he could say anything more. Harvey ran a hand through his hair, anger boiling in his chest. Lauren's dishonesty. Emily concurred, saying, It goes deeper than I thought. I waited because I wanted to make sure you were ready to hear it. And I made a choice after seeing how Lauren was handling everyone, including you, and the way things were progressing. I knew that the time had arrived. Harvey sighed deeply, giving her words time to sink in. Though that didn't make the problem any easier, he had to give Emily credit for taking such a big chance to reveal the truth. What should I do now? Harvey asked himself, almost to himself. Emily firmly stared at him before saying, You do what you know is right. Lauren has pulled many practical jokes on you. With a nod, Harvey said, She doesn't deserve your protection. But he still had a glimmer of doubt, and you've supported me throughout. Why? Emily paused to gather her thoughts before answering. Since my dad believed in you. He felt that you were honest and fair, Mr. Harvey. He thought that everyone should have access to the truth, and I agree with him. Harvey shot her a look that was equal parts mournful and grateful. I can't undo what has been done, but I can make sure Lauren accepts accountability for her actions. Emily's face took on a more determined expression. That is all that anyone can ask for. As she pivoted to depart, Harvey went on, but he sounded kinder this time. Emily, thank you very much. She paused at the threshold and gave him another glance. I don't require your appreciation. Mr. Harvey, just do the right thing. And just like that, she was gone, leaving Harvey with himself once more to think. The door shut with a click. Harvey felt the weight of the situation pressing down on him. Though it would not be easy, there was a clear way forward. He knew there was no alternative course of action, but he also knew that confronting Lauren would ruin the life they had built together. The truth was sinking in. Lauren had deceived him. The next few days appeared to go very quickly. The weight of what had transpired at the estate cast a shadow over everything about it. Harvey made every effort to avoid contacting Lauren, retreating to his office to review the evidence Emily had given him. He was compiling all the data, all the falsehoods, and all the stolen money. The most difficult element wasn't the betrayal, though. Reality set in that his life's passion was not who he thought she was. But Lauren was desperate to regain control. Emily had felt it slip from her hands from the moment she'd opened her mouth at the party. Ever since then, Harvey had grown distant, and she knew the perils of being apart. But Lauren was never one to give up easily. She was determined not to let a maid or anybody else undo the hard work that had brought her this far. One afternoon, Lauren happened across Harvey in his study while he was sifting through yet another stack of papers. Her patience quickly wearing thin, she went into the room, closed the door, and leaned her arms against the dwarf building. "We need to discuss," she stated. Her voice was sharp. Harvey did not glance at her. He continued to turn the pages of the documents, and her frustration only increased because of his silence. She tried again, her voice more insistent. "Harvey, I'm not going to let this go. I have been awaiting your responses for several days now." At last, Harvey looked up, his eyes frigid and his answers distant. He said the same thing twice. "You're trying to find an explanation." "Yes, in fact. Indeed, I do." Lauren responded, her tone growing more guarded. "For what purpose have you been acting as if I'm the enemy?" "Some ridiculous accusations from that maid, Emily." Harvey gave her a statement in correction. "Emily, as she prefers to be called, is not your usual maid. She showed me the proof. Proof of what you've done behind my back, Lauren." Though Lauren's mouth contracted, it was obvious that she wasn't ready to give up the fight. After all these years, you're really going to believe her word over mine? She questioned incredulously. I'm not taking anyone's word for it. Harvey shot back, raising his voice in protest. I looked over the files. I've seen the transactions, and you've been stealing from me. Lauren, from our company, from our very being. Lauren's eyes blazed with anger, but it was more than that. Fear. With a low, steely voice, she said, I did what I had to do. Her world of lies had taken so long to meticulously construct that the prospect of it crumbling terrified her more than anything else. You are unaware of the brutality that exists in the economic world. I was protecting us, looking out for our future. Harvey closed the folder, protecting us from the loud bang that was echoing across the room. He insisted, his voice quivering with disbelief, that he had been lying to me and stealing from me for years. Lauren stepped forward, her frustration erupting. I was ensuring our safety. Harvey, you've always been too innocent and gullible. You're not aware of the true state of affairs outside. Those individuals, the board members, would have eaten you alive if I hadn't stepped in. I was the one who kept everything together. With his eyes gleaming with wrath, Harvey stood up and said, You weren't holding anything together. Lauren, you were breaking it from the inside out, not making it better for us. You did it for yourself because you wanted power and control, regardless of who you heard. As they traveled, Lauren's face twisted with anger and damaged pride. I acted appropriately. Were you to blame for letting them run all over us? Harvey shook his head, his voice toned down in disappointment. In this case, it was never about us. Lauren, you were constantly at the center your want, your hunger. Lauren began to object, but Harvey cut her off in a tone that was forceful and unyielding. Lauren's confidence faltered for the first time, knowing that Harvey would not relinquish the power she had clung to for so long. She was losing it, and there was nothing she could do about it. You jeopardize not only our union, but also our company's operations and our employees. In the world your husband trusted you most, you stole from him. Which words are you comfortable me using? Harvey, when she asked, her voice became almost sad. I did what I thought was right. I was trying to protect us. Harvey's expression hardened. That is no longer true, in my opinion. You did not manage to protect us. It's over, Lauren. You were protecting yourself. For a while, there was an intolerable silence. Lauren did not move. For the first time in years, she found herself surrounded, her pride wounded, and her mind searching for a way out. Harvey looked away from her and spoke in a stern but quiet tone. When I file for divorce, I'm going to use the money you took to make up for all the damage you caused. It is falling back by every cent. Lauren's heart dropped to her stomach. She had expected a fight, even if she hadn't expected this particular divorce. The word hung in the air like a death sentence. When her carefully built world fell apart, she never would have imagined Harvey would wait as long as he did. As she began, her voice cracked. She tried again, more desperately this time. We have the ability to remedy this. I'm able to fix this. But Harvey didn't turn around. He turned to face her and said in a firm, cold voice, It's too late for that, Lauren. Lauren felt her chest tighten as panic started to creep in. All along, she was the one holding the strings and in control, but now that it was unraveling, she had no idea how to stop it. Harvey exited the room, leaving her standing there amid the wreckage of their marriage. Lauren felt the full weight of her choices pressing down on her for the first time in her life. She could only blame herself because she was totally defenseless. Lauren's once perfectly structured and managed environment began to unravel more quickly than she could have imagined. Harvey's decision to file for divorce caused uncontrollably bad ripples through their social networks. Whispers about her brutality and arrogance had turned into open conversations about her betrayal and dishonesty. The individuals she had counted on and who had before hung on to her every word were beginning to distance themselves. The first hint came when she tried to call a close friend. She had known Victoria for a very long time. Since she could remember, Victoria had been Lauren's confidant, to whom she had revealed at least part of her secrets. But when Lauren's call went to voicemail, she realized something had changed. She called back, more urgently this time. When Victoria finally answered, her voice had changed, calm and isolated. "Victoria," Lauren didn't want to sound so pleading. "I have to talk to you about Harvey." A pause. The situation is convoluted. On the other hand, Lauren almost heard the reluctance. "I think that's not a very good idea." Lauren. Victoria finally spoke in a disengaged voice. "People are talking to each other. Indeed, a great deal of rumors have surfaced." Under Lauren's hard grip on the phone, rumors grew more intense. "You know the manner in which individuals speak? Everything is false. It's just too much." But Victoria didn't seem to be persuaded. "I'm not sure, Lauren, and I don't want to become involved. Look, until things cooled down, maybe it would be best if we both took a break." Suddenly, the phone connection was lost. Neither was Victoria the first friend to leave. Lauren's carefully planned social media network slowly destroyed the invitations she used to attend all the major gatherings, including dinners, parties, and private galas. Then, they stopped going there. On the other hand, Harvey seemed to ride out the storm in a composed manner. He had done everything he could to keep the public informed about the details of their divorce. Nevertheless, the fact was too big to ignore. Before long, rumors began to spread about what was really causing it. The truth about Lauren's betrayal spread out. In the meantime, the mansion staff, who had eluded her notice before, began to exchange quick looks. When Emily passed by, they had heard what she had done. As they were aware of what Lauren had been concealing, their silence was itself a condemnation. Even if they had the audacity to avoid confronting her previously, they might have proceeded a little more slowly, barely acknowledging her until it was absolutely necessary. Lauren could feel it. The atmosphere's loss and alteration. It was oppressive to be in control. She tried to salvage what little was left by calling her lawyers to try and mitigate the effects of Harvey's decision to return the stolen funds, but she was unsuccessful. The financial institutions were more than willing to work with the data Emily had supplied, and Harvey was a stickler for detail. Already he was hard at work undoing all of the illicit transactions to ensure that the funds Lauren had pilfered went to the charities of his choosing. Her desperation grew with each passing day as she realized how quickly everything was going away. It was like watching a car crash in slow motion, and she could not stop it. It provided the final blow when she tried to contact a business acquaintance she had previously influenced. Her intention was to take advantage of a favor in order to make ends meet while the divorce was being settled. However, she was more accustomed to a warm, fuzzy acceptance than a chilly, impersonal rejection. "Lauren," Mrs. I perused the electronic mail. "We regret to inform you that, as of right now, we will no longer be doing business with you. This decision will take effect immediately. We appreciate your prior contributions, but given the circumstances, we are unable to carry on with our collaboration." Lauren stared at the television, shocked. This was not intended to be the way it worked. Could they all leave her so soon after she made these connections and relationships? For pride's sake, she could not accept it. She started by making a few more phone calls and sending more emails, but the results stayed the same. Doors that had been ajar had now been safely shut. The social elite who had previously welcomed her with open arms showed little interest in her without Harvey's backing, without the shield of their combined riches and influence. Lauren was merely a bother. Lauren's world was ending, and Emily's life in the house was changing in ways she never would have predicted. The staff had always treated her with modest respect, but once her role in exposing Lauren's dishonesty became clear, murmurs spread more widely of her courage and the sacrifices she made in order to behave morally. Harvey also seems to have a different perspective on her. Although they continued to communicate professionally, they now shared a novel level of trust. Emily, who had hitherto wandered the mansion's hallways as discreetly as possible, found herself assuming a more visible position when he asked her opinion on small matters concerning the house or for her take on something he had overlooked. Every day, it appeared like Harvey valued her presence more and more, and the other maids began to look to her for guidance. Emily never made an effort to take advantage of her unexpected success. She performed her tasks without seeking influence or power, with the same quiet dignity that had always been hers. However, the shift in people's opinions of her was obvious. Lauren noticed it as well one morning. There was an awkward pause where she would have sneered, but she could feel Emily going by in the corridor. Lauren felt awkward around Emily after treating her like she was beneath her. It was like the power balance had shifted without their notice. Lauren made an unsuccessful attempt to regain control of the house. The staff ceased yelling at her requests. They still carried out their tasks, of course, but the fear and anxiety she had once instilled in them had disappeared. It was the first time Emily had ever destroyed that illusion in her life. Lauren had never really experienced helplessness before. She could no longer restore her carefully maintained fade. People who had once admired her were now either contemptuous of her or, worse, uninterested. Her former glittering life, which was based on dishonesty, manipulation, and control, had faded into shadows, and now she was losing ground beneath her feet. Lauren was unable to do anything except watch as Emily and Harvey continued to grow while hers came to an end. And finally, the worst part. Lauren was only responsible for herself. Harvey sat in his office, the long shadows made by the afternoon sun. He looked out the window at the expansive garden, his mind taken away from the magnificent scene in front of him. Nevertheless, everything was different. He was in the thick of things, still trying to make sense of his marriage, the instability in his life, and the betrayal that had been developing right before his eyes. The fight with Lauren had occurred weeks before. Emily had come clean, the divorce decree was being drawn up, and the charitable donations were being made. Lauren was, of course, protesting and clinging to as much as she could. But Harvey had been thorough, his lawyers were prepared, and they were in control. Having obtained Emily's proof, Lauren's influence was all but destroyed. Harvey was still unable to let go of the whole thing. For years, he had put his trust in Lauren as they created their life together, but suddenly, everything was coming apart. Despite the misunderstanding, Emily's role was clear. She had not only told him the truth, but had supported him the whole way. And now, looking out into the garden, he questioned why a soft knock on the door had taken his mind away from his thoughts. "Come on in." Harvey's voice carried the weight of the day. Emily walked through the open door. Her expression was serene as usual. "Mr. Harvey, you wanted to see me." Harvey nodded, gesturing for her to take a seat. "Emily, I've been thinking about everything that's happened." He refrained from speaking. He chose his words carefully. I couldn't help but wonder why Emily gave him such a thoughtful look for a moment. "You've helped me more than anyone else." Though she had anticipated this question at some point, she had been prepared for it. "Mr. Harvey, it was more than a simple attempt to assist you. It all came down to acting morally. My father, he has always had confidence in your moral fiber and ability to manage the company fairly. He was furious to find out what Lauren had been up to. I knew that if Dad were here, he would want me to make things right, even though he was too weak to fight back." Harvey listened to her words without saying anything. Her voice sounded so honest and collected that he recognized how much this had saddened her. This went beyond merely exposing Lauren or taking revenge. Emily interpreted this as personal. "I am aware of that." There was a long pause before Harvey spoke. "You were not, however, obligated to take part. You could have said nothing at all. You had the option to ignore it all and remain silent." Emily seemed to gather her thoughts for a short while by glancing down. "I thought about it for a while," she said. "Then I realized that I would never be able to live with myself if I let her get away with it. My father gave his life to support your family and that business. I was unable to stand by and watch while she undermined every conviction he had." Harvey fell back in his chair as her comments started to sink in. He had not had much opportunity to get to know Emily's father, but he remembered him as a hard-working and loving man. It made sense. Emily was not behaving in her own best interests anymore. Her desire to honor her father's heritage drove her. Harvey held her gaze and said in a serious tone, "I owe you more than I can ever repay. Without your help, I don't think I could have confronted the truth, and you have helped me more than anyone else." Emily shook her head a little. I'm not owed anything by you. Harvey, Mr. I didn't look for payment for this. I followed the right course of action. Harvey observed her in silence for some time. He looked at Emily and realized that he had come to rely on her more than he had thought. She had quiet toughness and perseverance that had kept her grounded through it all, and he admired that. With composure and gravity, Harvey said, I need to tell you something. I've been alone myself quite a bit lately. Emily gave a slight frown. Her degree of curiosity rose. What is that? Harvey took a long breath, knowing that what he said next would change the whole situation. I knew Lauren for a long time before you brought those documents to me. He admitted to speaking quietly. I was anxious. To put it plainly, I declined to accept them. Emily's eyes grew significantly, and her countenance wavered with surprise. Harvey, you knew, he nodded. I had observed unusual transactions, little details, and financial anomalies in the company. I found it difficult to acknowledge Lauren's accountability. But internally, I knew something wasn't right. I was simply unable to confront it. Emily's expression softened as she leaned in a little. Why then did you remain silent? Harvey's jaw tensed as he turned to face the desk. Primarily because I didn't have the proof. I didn't want to accuse her of anything so heinous without enough evidence. I kept telling myself I was wrong, and there had to be a reason. Emily didn't say it loudly, but you weren't wrong. Harvey nodded, the revelation tightening his throat. No, I wasn't. And when you handed the files to me, everything that I had been trying to avoid seemed to be looking me in the face. Thanks to your support, I eventually faced her. Emily looked down as she took in what he had just spoken. She had thought that Harvey was not aware of Lauren's duplicity, but now she knew that he had been fighting with himself for quite some time. I was naive. In silence, Emily spoke. I was unaware that you were handling it already. Harvey offered a half-smile that did not extend to his eyes. That means that we are our own allies in this, isn't it? Emily glanced at him, a small smile playing on her lips. I guess it does. They sat quietly for a short while, letting the enormity of all that had happened sink in. But this is the first instance in a very long time. Harvey didn't feel alone in his chaos-filled life. Emily had been there for him from the beginning, even through the darkest moments. He realized how much he had come to depend on her while they sat there. Thank you very much, Harvey said in a low voice. His look, her sympathetic eyes, and his words applied to everyone Emily encountered. I'm grateful, Mr. Harvey. She stood up to leave. Harvey felt an odd tranquility settle over him as he watched her go. He felt for the first time that there was light at the end of the tunnel, even though nothing was perfect. And he knew that with Emily by his side, he could overcome whatever was ahead. Lauren was sitting in the living room, staring at the fire in the hearth. The warmth that had previously comforted her felt hollow, like everything else in her life. The mansion was silent, a stark contrast to the lively events and get-togethers that had previously filled these hallways. Now everything felt so distant, as if it had belonged to someone else. With her head lowered to the table, she waited for a call or message to let her know someone was there. There was still someone there at her side, even though the screen remained dark, as it had done for days. Her friends, the ones she'd laboriously cultivated over the years, were all gone. One by one, they had distanced themselves from her. With Harvey's money and influence gone, she was no longer the queen of her social circle. She was of no importance. Footfalls echoed across the hallway. Lauren's gaze flickered away from her thoughts as Harvey's mysterious expression appeared in the doorway. She knew that this moment was almost here. She had always known about it. It wasn't any easier knowing that he had the paperwork in front of her. Lauren. Harvey's voice was cool and collected. We have to talk. Lauren straightened her back in her chair and pretended not to cry, even though she was breaking on the inside. I suppose this is related to the divorce. Harvey stepped further into the room, drawing nearer to her by a few feet. Yes, it really is. She swallowed her hands and gripped the armrests of the chair tightly. You genuinely think that this is necessary? We have made a life together. Harvey, you can't just throw that out. Harvey's expression did not go away. I'm not throwing anything out. Lauren, when you tricked me, that's exactly what you did. When you cheated, deceived, and took from me, her eyes flashed with so much anger that she clenched into her jaw. I fulfilled my duty. You were quite credulous and naive. I was defending our previous work. Harvey's voice lifted slightly, the calm fade revealing enough of the underlying annoyance beneath. You were not protecting anything. It was you protecting your own interests. You took what wasn't legally yours without caring who got hurt in the process. Lauren, meantime, started to stand up. Her hands were clenched at her sides. What? You're gonna leave me with nothing after everything I've done for you? Harvey addressed her stern glare with, "You'll get what you deserve. Lauren, the money you stole is being returned to you. You won't get anything more than the divorce settlement as far as the remaining portion is concerned." Panic began to set in as Lauren felt her heart quicken. "Harvey, you cannot do this to me. You cannot take everything away from me." Harvey's tone did soften a little, but there was no chance for debate. He answered, "I'm not taking everything. Lauren, you still have the chance to make a fresh start, but I won't let you continue to live off the lies and deception that you manufactured." Lauren moved forward, her voice pleading. "Harvey's, right now. Please. Yes, I made a mistake, but it's fixable. We can rebuild, and I can change." Harvey shook his head, clearly sad in his eyes. "It's too late for that. It's too late to make corrections. Lauren, now that the trust has been broken, there is nothing left." She froze as the finality of his words set in. He had business to conduct. He was giving it everything he had. She knew their marriage and her own life could not be saved. "When do you plan to turn in your paperwork?" Lauren asked, her voice almost heard above a whisper. "Tomorrow?" Harvey responded in kind. With a stern tone, "My lawyer is finishing the paperwork. Once it is filed, we will move forward with the asset distribution. I've made sure that everyone will receive justice." Lauren slumped back down her legs, feeling weak. She was unable to sense the warmth of the flickering fire in the background. She possessed a type of cold that only fire could cure. It was a deep-seated kind of cold. "You already know what needs to be done," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "Yes, in fact," Harvey said in a low voice. "Yes, I have." Nothing was said about their shared past for a long time. Neither of them could say or do anything to restore the years they had spent building a life together. Lauren turned to face the fire, her mind racing. She'd always believed she could handle everything and bargain her way out of any situation, even though her thesis was different. Harvey was no longer the man she could influence with charm or hollow promises because he had seen right through her. And now here we are. There was no going back. Harvey watched her for a few more seconds, his heart pounding with grief. The woman before him was different from the one he married, even though he loved Lauren. Alternatively, it's likely that he was unaware of her past behavior and that she had always been this way. In a soft voice, Harvey said, "I'll have the papers delivered to you tomorrow." He was now speaking in a tone of resignation. "You should sign them willingly, ideally." Lauren didn't answer because she was unable to. All she could do was stare into the fire and feel the last traces of her life disappearing. Harvey turned to leave, but not even able to reach the door. He paused to take one final look at her. "I hope you are able to move forward." Lauren, I really do." When he left, Lauren was left alone in the abandoned house that had once been her domain. The silence that followed was intolerable. The reality of her situation enveloped her like a heavy blanket, ensnaring her and making it inevitable. When her kingdom crumbled, there was no one to help her pick up the pieces. Divorce, which had been a distant prospect, was now a cold, hard reality. Deep down, Lauren knew that Harvey had made his decision, and there was no turning back. The fireplace fire was gently flickering. In the dim light, Lauren sat with numb consciousness. She had always believed that her power and control were the only things that could keep her from failing. However, this instance, it occurred to her how fleeting it had all been. It was her own fault. She had to pay the price for her own design of death. When the papers came the next day, the last chapter of her marriage would end. The warm glow of the early morning sun streamed into Harvey's office via the windows. It was only a few days after he filed for divorce, but the effects of his decision were still with him. The mansion felt lighter now, but it also felt more serene, calmer, and devoid of any sign of shared power between him and Lauren. The noises of betrayal were slowly giving way to a sense of closure. Even though he was seated at his desk and staring at the mountain of paperwork that needed to be signed, he was not thinking about it at all. He'd been thinking about Emily for the past few weeks. She had grown beyond the role of housekeeping. She had been the comforting anchor through stormy times, helping him get through some of the lowest moments of his life. With composure and unwavering support. A quiet knock on the door jolted him out of his trance. Harvey called. "Enter." I knew without having to ponder who it was. Emily carried a tray into the room with 2 cups and a pot of coffee on it. She added in a kind and kindly manner, "I thought you could use a break." Harvey smiled, grateful for the distraction. "You know far too much about me." After setting the tray on the table next to the window, she filled a cup for herself and Harvey. After handing him the cup, she said, "I've learned a few things over the past few months." She had a little smile. He took it and wrapped his hands around the hot mug, but he did not take a sip. Instead, he looked at Emily's face. She was calm as usual, but he'd recognized there was more going on than he'd realized. "Emily." His voice was quieter than normal when he talked. "You have helped me so much, more than I could have ever dreamed for." Emily sat down across from him and wrapped her hands around her own cup. "I just did the right thing, Mr. Harvey." Harvey shook his head a little. "But it goes beyond that. You helped me out. Even though it might have cost you everything, you revealed the truth when I wasn't even aware that I needed assistance. You have been my pillar of support. All the way through." Emily took a moment to process what he had said, then looked down before meeting his gaze again. "I didn't do it to get attention. I couldn't stand by and let Lauren wreck everything, not after everything my father had to go through." Harvey nodded for a second, understanding in his eyes. "Thank you for becoming aware of this." He took a long breath, feeling the weight of all he had to say. "Your role in this process has gone beyond a worker, I've realized. You've grown into someone I respect and believe in." Emily's eyes widened considerably, and she appeared uncertain for the first time in weeks. "Please, Mr. Harvey." Harvey interrupted you gently. "Harvey, give me a call." A casual silence fell over the room as they looked at each other and shared a silent understanding. Emily had always been silent and aloof, but Harvey gave Emily an unwarranted, even inhuman distance. Finally, Emily remarked quietly, "It did not meet my expectations. I never stopped thinking about anything. To me, you wouldn't appear to be merely an employee." Harvey finishes for her, "But I do. Emily, I've noticed that you've changed for a while. You see people for who they really are, not for what they own. Status or money don't appeal to you. You care about keeping integrity and morals high. Furthermore, that is uncommon." Emily glanced down at her mug and gave it a quick brush. "I just try to do my absolute best." With his coffee down, Harvey leaned forward and rested his elbows on his knees. "It appears that you have done more than that. You have opened my eyes to things that I was previously unable to notice. You've reminded me of the things that are really important." Emily met his gaze, her eyes full of power and serenity. "You've always had it within you, Harvey." Reminding you that there was a halt was all that was required. As the truth of what she was saying started to sink in, Harvey knew that she was right. His morality, judgment, and sense of self-worth had all been tarnished by his marriage to Lauren. But with Emily's help, he felt like he was seeing the world in a different light. His hand slid over the table and settled gently on hers. Despite being little, the gesture had a significant impact. Emily looked down at their hands, then back up at him, her gaze softening. Harvey answered in a quiet, sincere voice, "I don't know where this will go. But there is one thing I know for sure. I do not wish to sever our relationship." Emily smiled. A pleasant radiance illuminated her face. "Neither do I." They stayed silent for a little while longer, and as the weight of the talk gradually lifted, they both began to accept the new direction their lives were taking. Harvey felt as if the restraints that had held him down for so long were now beginning to come off. It was the lightest Harvey had felt in months. But Emily was still practical as ever. "What will you do after that?" she asked gently, as if leading him in the direction of his next adventure. Harvey blew out a breath and ran a hand through his hair. "I'm not positive as of yet. This isn't an official divorce yet, but I already know a lot will change. I accept that Lauren will fight me through positive times and bad." Emily nodded, realizing the challenges he still needed to conquer. "You'll get through it because you're stronger than you think." Harvey gave her a genuine smile that appeared in his eyes as a result of you. There was stillness for a bit more before Harvey stood up and went around to the window. He looked out at the garden that had given him so much comfort over the years, and a sense of peace came over him. He looked back at her after a minute and said, "I've decided that once the divorce is finalized, I'm going to step away from the company for a while. Focus on the things that are truly important." Emily looked at me like I was crazy. Like Charity, Harvey said in a firm voice, "I've been thinking about the money Lan stole and how it's going to be returned. I would like to do more work. My goal is to help those in need and maximize my resources." Emily smiled and remarked, "That sounds like a great concept." Her eyes were full of happiness. Harvey nodded. "And I'm going to need your help." Emily blinked, startling me. "Yes, in fact," Harvey's voice was firm as he talked, "you are the ideal candidate for this. You've always concentrated on aiding others in order to do the right thing. I couldn't imagine a better friend for the first time in a very long time." Emily experienced being treated more like a peer than a worker. The idea of working with Harvey on something meaningful filled her with a serene joy. She said, "It would be an honor," with gentleness. Harvey smiled again, looking toward him with more assurance than he had shown in a few months. He knew he wasn't going it alone with Emily at his side, and even though there was still a long way to go, he finally felt like he was on the right track. They sat together in the quiet, early light, and the future no longer seemed so unknown. It appeared to have so much promise. Lauren sat at the dining table, feeling the weight of the cold house hushing over her. The once vibrant home that had hosted important meetings and glamorous parties appeared to be a lifeless shell. She regarded the divorce decrees spread out before her, their very existence erased. The large black font that said how completely she was going to fail. Everything was completed. Harvey had won out, and all she had spent years arduously building was going to crumble. She took the pen and ran it over the signature line, her fingers shaking slightly. And that was all. Signing meant no going back, no wealth, and no power. The life she had laboriously created was gone and disintegrating in front of her eyes for a brief second. Lauren wondered if she should sign. She thought about stepping up her fight, drawing out the court case, and causing Harvey as much suffering as she could. But deep down, she knew it was pointless. He sighed heavily. He had the upper hand and all the evidence. What's more, why would she fight for a marriage built on lies and a ruined reputation? Lauren put the pen on the page and signed her name. The ink leaked slightly onto the page, sealing her death. She sank back in her chair and looked at the signature with a broken heart. Her grief went beyond her material wealth or social standing. It was the realization that she had been operating under a false pretext her entire life. She waited there by herself till the room's door creaked open and Harvey entered. He looked at her for a long moment, his expression unclear. Despite having loved this woman, he stood there sad for what might have been. "It's done." Lauren's voice was monotonous and quiet. "The paperwork is signed by me." Harvey nodded and stepped forward to take the paperwork from the table. "Thank you very much." Lauren scoffed at the nasty smile and twisted her lips. "Thank you very much." "Why did I lose my way of life?" Harvey exhaled deeply. "Hard but pliable." "No." "Lauren, for being a kind person." At last, she winced at his comments, but she was done battling. She saw that he was right. No matter the opponent, him, the world, or herself, her battles were pointless. Now that she's left with the debris, what happens? When Lauren asked, her voice was small, almost fragile. Harvey looked at her and spoke to her with a feeling of finality that she had not heard in a long time. "Now, you both make a new start and move on." Lauren laughed, even if it sounded more like a choke start over. "Everything is going with you. I won't take anything at all." Harvey whispered to himself, "You'll get the settlement. It's enough if you wish to rebuild." Lauren said nothing. She knew the payoff would never compare to the life she enjoyed before, but perhaps Harvey had been right. Perhaps she could start over. What scared her the most was the thought. Harvey started to turn to leave, but paused at the door to give her one final look. "I hope Lauren is not harmed by you. I hope you have success locating genuine happiness." Lauren was left alone in the abandoned mansion after he departed. The silence. She pushed herself in once more and studied the door for a considerable amount of time, attempting to process all that had occurred in the previous few seconds: the mansion, the wealth, the social circles. It had all meant the world to her. But it had vanished by now, possibly. Perhaps, just perhaps, she could manage without it. Harvey experienced a weight lift off his shoulders when he let go of Lauren. The divorce had brought about closure even though it was final. He was ready to put the lies that had destroyed his marriage for years behind him and move on to live a life based on integrity and honesty. Later in the afternoon, Harvey just so happened to find himself in the garden, where he always went to unwind. The flowers were in full bloom and the air was filled with the scent of fresh jasmine and roses. It was peaceful, very different from the mayhem that had taken over his life just a few months earlier. Walking up the stone walkway, he saw Emily at the greenhouse, tending to a row of newly planted flowers. She gazed up at him, a small smile spreading across her face. Harvey approached her, feeling comforted by her presence. "Everything has been settled. The papers are signed, it's over," he said with a feeling of closure in his voice. Emily inquired, wiping her hands on her apron and turning to face him. "How do you feel?" Harvey considered her question for a moment and smiled, comforted. Emily smiled back, eager to go and with warm, radiant eyes. "I'm glad to hear that." They stood in the garden for a while, the soft breeze rustling the leaves about them. It felt different for the first time in months, suddenly calm and full of promise. Harvey had the ability to see beyond the mistakes of the past and into a boundless future. "Have you thought about the philanthropic work more?" I asked Emily. With a nod, Harvey broke the comfortable silence. "Yes, I have. And I'm going to need your help." "Emily, you've got the courage to do it. Given your understanding of helping others, you are the best candidate to lead this." With a slight look of surprise, Emily accepted the offer, and her eyes widened. With a smile, Harvey interrupted and said, "You've given me a new perspective on the world. Emily, together, I think we could actually make a difference." Emily's cheeks flushed a little for a moment. Harvey clearly had faith in her, even if she had never imagined herself in that role. She slowly nodded. "I would be glad to help." Harvey smiled. He felt excitement growing inside of him and a fresh sense of purpose in his life for the first time in a long time. He no longer had to scrape by. He was making something new, something important. They stood in the yard together as the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the flowers and trees. Harvey turned to look at Emily and smiled slightly. "We've experienced a lot together after all." Emily nodded to meet his gaze. "Yes, we have." Harvey did, however, adopt a more upbeat tone when he said, "We get to start over and this time we're doing it right." Emily smiled, and all appeared to be okay. The pain of betrayal and the chaos of the past. They had missed everything. With opportunities, hope, and the possibility of something better, their future lay ahead of them. Together, they stepped back toward the house, ready for whatever was ahead.